Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's event here at Sparkloop. I'm Louis, your host. Probably you've come across us before if you've joined these, not for the first time. I'm really excited for today's event. We're trying something slightly new. We're doing what we're calling a Fireside Chat. I don't think anybody actually has a fireside with them in the room. Jason, Josh, are you with Fireside, without Fireside?
Fire free.
Oh,
It's a real missed opportunity.
Okay, so we'll make a note. We need to be sending out portable firesides for the next ones in the future. But I'm really excited about today. We're going to be talking about a topic that's a little bit new to us at Sparkloop, a little bit outside of our comfort zone and area of expertise. We're talking about how to write a newsletter that people love to read. So with me, I have Josh Spector of the For the Interested newsletter, who I hope a lot of you will already know, and Jason from the Pour Over, Jason Woodruff. You might be a slightly less familiar face, I'm imagining, to a lot of our audience because your newsletter isn't written for creators and newsletter operators in the same way that Josh's is, but equally as impressive. And what you've been doing over the last, is it 2.5, 3 years with the Pour Over is amazing. So I'm really excited about this topic. Both of you sort of expressed to me privately over the last 6 months or so that you'd like to talk about this topic of writing newsletters and how to increase engagement and how to write a really good newsletter. So I'm glad that I've managed to force you to jump in on this. And before we jump in, we'll wait a minute or two for any stragglers who are going to join us and jump in with some introductions. In the meantime, if you have any questions throughout today's session, just put them into the chat. I'll make a note of them and make sure that we get to those in about half an hour or so. We'll have plenty of time for questions, and I'm sure Josh and Jason would love to answer those rather than my ramblings that I will go through. So that will be great. And I would love to hear, who we have here in the chat with us, who we've got, familiar faces, what newsletter you're working on, where you come from. And if you want to share a link to your Twitter, to your newsletter homepage, to somewhere where people can find you, please do that. We'd love to see it. Great. Well, I've been rambling for enough. I think that's enough time for people to jump in. We've temporarily lost Jason, but that's fine. He's back.
I think I'm back.
Perfect stuff. This is it's all happening in real time, proving that it's live. It's not scripted. So let's jump in. And I guess maybe since we're talking about newsletters that people love to read, can you maybe both, one after the other, give me an idea of who your newsletter's for and why people love to read it?
Jason, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I'll start. So I founded and run the Pour Over. So it's politically neutral news, but targeted at Christians. So kind of the driving force behind it was me being a Christian, but kind of being frustrated with my news options and saying, hey, how can we do this better? And so it started as a personal exercise for me. And so technically started in 2018, but had very, I was personally connected with all couple hundred readers of it for the first few years. And then we really started trying to grow it in 2020. What did I answer the question?
Yeah, give us an idea of the scale of it today.
Yeah, so we have 360,000 subscribers now. We have a high 50% open rate, so like 57, 58%. And then we also have an Instagram with 110,000 followers, and our newsletter is turned into a podcast. So it's the same content. You can just kind of choose the format. And that gets about 10,000 downloads per episode.
Awesome stuff. And why do people say they love to read the newsletter?
Yeah, so I mean, it really comes down to the content of, and I don't know how applicable this is broadly, but for us specifically, for a long time, Christian news has meant politically conservative news, and my thought at least was like, hey, I align with some of those views, but it's my driving force isn't to figure out how to be a good Republican or to be a good Democrat. It's to be a Christian and apply that to the news. So there was a little bit of a missing category there, and also Christian news as a whole tends to primarily cover like Christian news, like what celebrity pastors are doing or missionaries or something like that, or it offers like thoughtful commentary on something weeks or months after it happened. And so our idea is, hey, how can we be timely and cover world news, the same things that, you know, non-Christians are going to hear about, that just major news sources cover, and cover that in a politically neutral way, so there's some trust, and provide a kind of another option or an alternative to the news.
Awesome stuff. And we're going to get into how you sort of found your voice and turn that into from a sort of a hypothesis or a mission into reality, I guess throughout the conversation. But Josh, can you give us the same details on you?
Sure. So my newsletter is called For the Interested. You can check it out at fortheinterested.com/subscribe. The audience for my newsletter is what I call creative entrepreneurs. And it's basically people who are building businesses around their creations. So that could mean writers, creators, entrepreneurs, coaches, consultants, marketers, that kind of thing. I've been writing it for almost 7 years now. I've got about 33,000 subscribers, a 50% open rate. And really what the newsletter does is I share proven strategies to help people grow their audience and business. The newsletter started for about the first 5 years or so. It was a weekly newsletter that came out on Sundays. It was what I call sort of a hybrid newsletter. So it was curated links to articles and videos and stuff that I found that was valuable. And then there'd usually be 1 or 2 links to stuff I created, original blog posts. I now have a podcast called I Want to Know that's weekly. So there's usually a link to that week's episode in there as well. So like I said, it was weekly for about the first 5 years. Then about 2 years ago, I launched a 1-paragraph daily edition. Sometimes it's only a sentence. So now the newsletter is basically on Sundays, you get this sort of longer curated newsletter. And then Monday through Friday, you get a 1-sentence, 1-paragraph newsletter. Those are different. It's not like the Sunday one just compiles what's in the weekday one. They're totally different, and we can get more into that and sort of why I've done it. But it's worked really well. People find it very, very valuable. And yeah, I think that kind of sums up what it is.
Yeah, that's I think it's a great introduction to both. So maybe a good place to jump into this then is, obviously, if you ever talk to any newsletter operator, and everybody we've had on our podcast, everyone who's come through and has said, has given any kind of workshop or masterclass or event or podcast, anything like that, they all say, writing great content, it's super important to us. It's the most important thing. In your sort of day-to-day businesses, or maybe week-to-week, month-to-month, obviously you have different priorities around the newsletter. You have the monetization side of things, you have the growth, all of that sort of stuff. How much are you actually, like, in real life prioritizing whatever you want to call it, newsletter quality, subscriber engagement? How are you prioritizing it? How are you measuring it? Like, what sort of mind space does that hold for you in your normal sort of working day?
Yeah, so it's a lot. I would say at least half my time is spent writing, and we send Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So it's the content, and it's been interesting as we've grown. The team has grown, and for a long time it was my goal to say I need to hire more writers and get out of the writing, and like just focus on the business, focus on growing, focus on monetization. And in the last and I never did. And in the last like 6 to 8 months, we've just switched focus to say, no, actually, like the biggest risk to the pour over is that the quality starts to suffer. And it's like it started with just me, and we now have multiple fabulous writers, but it's like I enjoy writing, and that's what the product is. And so if there is something, it should get my attention, and I should be involved. And so we've now started hiring more of the business side to say like, hey, let's keep me intimately involved in creating the content for that reason. And as far as like metrics, it's so it took a while to kind of hone the voice and kind of method of the pour over. And we took a lot of feedback and pivoted. Like if you look at our first email compared to where we are now, it's totally different. But if you look at what we do now compared to what we did 18 months ago, it's like virtually the same. And so there was a time when we were making like meaningful changes, to, hey, we're gonna lengthen the newsletter, or we're gonna shorten it, or we're going to add a new section or something like that. And we haven't messed with it in a while. And when we get feedback to that effect, like we log it away and continue to review it. But we're kind of not in that season. So I would say truthfully, we don't pay attention to many of those metrics, or like that feedback necessarily anymore. Cause it's like, hey, you either like it or you don't, and we're not going to please everyone. And if you don't like what we're doing, that's fine. Like there are other options out there. But we're not going to fundamentally change what we're doing, or the layout or the type of stories we cover or any of that. And so, and our subject lines are kind of, we take like the morning brew approach of like they're non-informational, and the goal is to say, hey, we want someone to open the email because it's from us, not because of the subject line. It's like you open it because you know what you're getting, or even if you don't know what you're getting, you know what type of thing you're going to get. And so our open rates are very stable. Like if there's a fluctuation in the open rate, it's because we got hit by spam or something. It's rarely, I would say, like a reflection of the content or the topic or something like that.
Got it. Yeah. Is that the same for you, Josh? I mean, how much of it do you think is especially with you sending a lot of very short emails? How much of that is the content itself versus who has written the content? Do you think that is important?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what Jason said resonates with me. I think for me, it's interesting. So my newsletter is called For the Interested, but it's really the Josh newsletter. I'm writing it all. There's no one. I have some people that help me with some logistical stuff around ads and whatever, but like I don't have a staff. It's not there's a brand name, but it's really a personal newsletter, although I'm sharing curated stuff. The way that, so I do think you build trust with an audience over time, that people understand, like, yes, they're opening it for me. That said, I do want subject lines that are going to drive curiosity and can sort of help. But ultimately, that only works if they get used to opening it and finding value, they're going to keep opening it. And you might have the world's greatest subject line, but if they open it and the newsletter sucks, they're going to very quickly stop opening it and unsubscribe. For me, I think, going back to sort of your original question, I don't really think about it in terms of writing a newsletter that people love. I think about it in terms of writing a newsletter that people find valuable. I am obsessed with my newsletter providing specific value to a specific audience. And this is going to sound ironic considering the name of my newsletter is For the Interested, but I think there's a big difference between an interesting newsletter and a valuable newsletter. And I want mine to be valuable, not interesting. And so along those lines, sort of let me explain, like kind of define the term, because people all the time, I say that and people ask me and they go, well, like, how do I know what's valuable? Right? Like, and to me, value is transformation, right? So if you're sharing content that's helping people get from point A to point B, that's actionable, that when they read it or click that link or do whatever, there's something they can immediately do afterwards to get where they want to go. That is valuable. If you're sharing something that they just read it and they go, wow, that was really interesting, but it doesn't actually lead them to do anything. It's the difference between, to give a specific example, right? If I share something that's like, here's how to get your newsletter subscribers to refer new subscribers to you, right? That is actionable. If I share something that's like, here's the state of the newsletter economy, it might be really interesting, but I wouldn't share that, right? So I'm always focused on, and I come across all sorts of interesting stuff, but I'm focused on what can someone do with this thing that I'm going to share for them. And that is, to me, if you're creating value, then the sort of will people love it falls into place. But it's one of the biggest, I don't want to say mistakes, because everyone can do whatever they want with their newsletter. But I see a lot of newsletters that are focused on, I want this to be interesting. And I think it's much harder to both build and monetize. And, to me, the key to success is value versus interesting.
I'm trying not to say, all I want to say is interesting now, but I shouldn't say interesting.
Right. I know, like I said, as I think about now, and again, I've learned a lot. Again, 7 years ago, I started my newsletter. I do like the name For the Interested. It worked. My newsletter has evolved. Initially it was like, my focus was ways to get better at your work, art, and life, which is like super broad. So it was a little more self-improvement-y. So it is ironic that like I have this whole rant about like, don't do interesting, and the name of my newsletter is For the Interested, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think interesting what Jason thinks about that. I mean, it's one of those things where you have different newsletters can perform different jobs for people, right? You can have things that are valuable in the sense of transformation, but I also get value from, not to compare anyone's newsletter to that, but like trashy TV shows, right? Like they have a place in my life. I find them valuable, even though they're definitely, or hopefully not transforming me too much. So, I mean, there's news, there's entertainment, there's all those different ways of providing value, right? How do you think about that, Jason? Like what do you want? Is there a transformation you want to happen for your subscribers?
I mean, there's certainly a missional component. So there's transformation in terms of like, and we provide calls to action in terms of like, hey, this happened and you should go act on it. Like don't just read about the hurricane, go help. But honestly, the thought that I had is what you do, Josh, sounds exhausting. Like you have to continually find things that are valuable. Whereas like right now, I am going to write a newsletter for 350,000 people on Friday, and I have no idea what the content is. Like, and there's no ability for me to know what the content is, but I also have no anxiety that like there will be no content, And so it's an interesting flip. The other thought I had is that in a newsletter in your space, figuring out how to be valuable as opposed to interesting is a lot easier to monetize. Like, because I subscribe to a whole bunch of newsletters, and like people that link interesting articles or say interesting things, it takes a long time to build any trust or anything to say like, oh, now you recommended this product, or I go do this thing. It's like, like that's not really why I'm here. Whereas if you're saying, hey, I provide great resources, like I help you move forward, then when you recommend something, like that's perfect. That's exactly why I come to you. And so monetizing that, it seems like would be much easier and is a more thoughtful business model.
Well, yeah, and I think what's interesting here, and again, it's great, whether it was intentional or not, Louis. I think it's great that you have the two of us on here because there are so many different approaches to this whole newsletter thing, right? And one of the most important things is that you're creating a newsletter that aligns with what you're trying to do in your business model and sort of all of it, right? So my guess, for me, I don't ever share quote unquote news in my newsletter. Almost everything I share is evergreen. It will be, for the most part, just as valuable a year from now as it is today, right? I'm not going to share, hey, Twitter rolled out this new feature. It's not a quote unquote newsletter, right? Whereas Jason's is very much topical and about what's happening now, right? There's value to both of those things. But I think what's interesting is each of us, and I don't fully know Jason's business model, but I'm assuming we have each gone a route that aligns with the business model that we want. So for me, for about the first 4 years or so of my newsletter, I had no sponsorships. I had no direct revenue in the newsletter. I was making money by people hiring me as a consultant and selling some info products and that courses and that kind of thing, right? So for me, I wanted a newsletter that was going to attract the kind of people that want to take action, that are trying to figure out these things, because those people would then be the type of people that would ultimately hire me. Now, I since then have added sponsors and, have diversified sort of revenue streams. But Jason's not trying to get people to hire him. He's going more of a sponsorship model and making his money that way. It's also why I think and I forget the exact number Jason said, but I think you said you have like 300,000 subscribers or something like massive, right? So his newsletter is 10 times bigger than mine in terms of subscribers, but he's playing a completely different game than I'm playing, right? And so if I were playing that game, if I was going, I want to create something that's monetized with sponsors, it might shift everything. I'd probably be writing a totally different newsletter, and vice versa. If he was going, okay, I want to do this, he'd be writing a different newsletter. And so both are fine and can be very successful. But I think it's important. A lot of times people, when they hear this newsletter advice, they're not, this person did it that way, but they don't realize that what they're trying to do is completely different from what you're trying to do, right?
Yeah.
So it's important to pick the people that you're listening to, that it's, does that actually align? Is that the kind of thing you're building or not? I don't need 300,000 subscribers. It'd be great. I'd love it. But I don't need that for my business model.
Yeah. So I'm the evergreen content. So do you find yourself writing the same thing frequently, or have you, or do you even like when, I just subscribed live,
Welcome aboard.
live on thank you. I'm excited.
Great.
Do I pick up on the journey now? Like I'm going to get the same email that everyone's going to get tomorrow.
Yeah.
I assume.
Yes. So I have a massive archives of stuff that you just joined now. So there's 7 years worth of stuff that you haven't seen. And in some ways that's a missed opportunity. That said, one thing that I do is I have on fortheinterested.com, I have not only all of the old newsletters, I have each individual item that was in those newsletters as its own post on the site. So you could go to fortheinterested.com right now and you could search for writing, and you're going to see all the stuff that I've shared in 7 years about writing. So there is an archive that you can sort of go through that way. The other thing I do that I've done at least the last 3 years, which has worked really well, is at the end of the year, I compile everything I shared in the newsletter into an ebook, a PDF, basically. Organize it by topic as opposed to sort of by date, and make it available for free. It's called The Secrets of Successful Creators. You can see it. You can get it. It's in my pinned tweet on Twitter at @JSpector. You can go get any of those, which basically gets you everything that you had. On a side note, I made that this gets into monetization, but I actually make it a pay what you want product. So you can get it for free. If you want to contribute some money, whatever, go for it. And a lot of people do, right? So at the end of the year, I put that out. My existing audience, a lot of times will get it. People that haven't been here before will get it. I think 15% of people pay something for it. So it becomes a revenue generator. For me, it's easy, right? And this is also one of the reasons why, depending on goals and stuff, that I like evergreen newsletters is I'm able to reuse that stuff, repackage it, and get a lot more value out of it versus topical stuff where that the value of the time you put into creating it is very limited.
Yeah, I mean, we were just at a conference and we had like printed out the news. It was our first foray into print media,
Right.
and it never felt so brief, that it's like, wow, we printed 250 copies and handed out 120, and now we're literally just going to throw this away because no, we have tomorrow's news. Yeah, it's an interesting.
And by
I
the
don't
way,
know.
my
I mean,
background is as a journalist, right? So I
oh,
went to college, I studied journalism.
and you learned you didn't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. I moved to LA. I worked in PR. I worked for the Hollywood Reporter as a journalist. So I'm very familiar. When I worked at the Hollywood Reporter, I was covering entertainment industry news. I was writing 3 to 5 articles a day. And they'd go out and they'd be in the paper, they'd be online, and the next day I'd go in and do it all over again. So,
Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Like that's very valuable. And there's lots of, very successful sort of daily newsletters or weekly newsletters. But again, in terms of my own sort of business goals here, like I've chosen to go a different direction. And I do think, again, it all depends what you want to do, but there are certainly advantages to the evergreen stuff.
Yeah, man, it feels to me like you could, and this is the type of fundamental shifts that people will recommend that we just ignore now. But it feels like if you're looking for a fundamental shift, could just set this up as an automation.
Yep.
You have 7 years of content, and set it up. Who can, if it's evergreen, you have great stuff, put it up. I subscribed. I just subscribed today. I'm taken care of for the next 7 years, and you can quit writing and just figure out how to grow and monetize it.
Yeah, no, it's again, and it's funny because I think I'm really good at repurposing and sort of repackaging this stuff. But even with that said, I know I'm missing a ton. Like even just in this conversation, I was like, I could go take all the writing ones, and I could, if I wanted, even create a paid newsletter that's all automated and be like, hey, for whatever it is, for $20, not even a subscription, right? For $20, you're gonna get every writing. Once a week, I'll email you one of these writing resources that I've shared. Probably not a bad idea for me to try to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what I find really interesting about, obviously there are differences between the two of you, but that it does come back to the personal touch of, Josh's newsletter presumably wouldn't be found super valuable if it was just the content without the context of who is sourcing and creating and delivering that. And the same with the pour over. I mean, there are lots of daily newsletters. They could, the news is the same for everybody, at least outside of the US. In the US, a little bit debatable, but for the rest of us, the news is the same for everybody. And it's more about your personal touch and your viewpoint and your voice when you're sharing it. So I mean, I would love to hear a little bit. Sorry.
Well, sorry to cut you off. Just real quickly, I would also add to that, one of the things that hopefully also comes across is both of us are very clear on who we're trying to serve and how, and genuinely care about them. Like I feel like both of our answers have been very much about the audience versus I think some people that are just like, I want to make a bunch of money. I want to I think, and I think that's something that's universal with every newsletter creator that I've seen succeed. They are more focused on the audience and serving them than they are just like, neither of us were like, I just want to write about whatever I want to write about.
Yeah. Well, and I think so for multiple years, no one paid the pour over anything, and like, and you were saying the same thing, Josh, like you've been doing this for 7 years, and it is a long game. And if it's not a get rich quick scheme, but it's also I mean, I love the business model. It costs virtually nothing to send an email, so like as soon as you do reach scale and whatever that is, like it's different. For example, scale for Josh is different than what scale for the pour over was, just because of the differences in it. It's a great business model, but it is you have to really enjoy what you're writing about, and you have to really care about the news, because you'll just quit before. Like I can't imagine yeah, doing something I didn't love for free for so long, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
what does your writing process look like then? When you're putting together the newsletter, writing, editing, how do you make sure that you are providing that value or that interest for the reader while also still being excited and being engaged and enjoying what you're doing, and kind of falling in love with the process and the audience and the product? Because it's something that I struggle with, not as a newsletter author, but as a digital product creator, with Sparkloop.
Mm-hmm.
If you're providing support, especially in the early days at like Sunday evening when you want to be out with friends or something, like you've got to really care about the people you're helping to be able to jump into that support chat and help them figure out that they haven't deleted the internet. They've just accidentally removed the Safari logo from their desktop, right? Which is a genuine support thing that happened to me once. So you have to really like and care about the people to want to see them succeed. So how do you both approach that?
Josh, I'll let you go.
Sure. So one of the things I'll say is that, as far as, because so much of my newsletters are curated, so as far as finding stuff, I don't really set aside any specific time. People always ask me, like, do you spend hours a week looking for stuff? I'm like, no, I don't. But that's because I'm already interested, to Jason's point, right? I'm interested in this space. So all I'm doing literally is, whenever I come across something that I think might fit, I'm copying and pasting that link into a document. And then when I sit down to write the newsletter, I go, okay, which of these things do I want to include? As far as the writing part goes, having a 1 sentence or 1 paragraph newsletter certainly saves you a lot. For the weekday editions, it doesn't take that long to write it. And even my Sunday edition, which is longer, over the years has gotten more and more condensed, right? I've shortened, it's headline and 1 sentence summary. It used to be like paragraph summary for each of them. Like, I've sort of realized I don't need that, right? Like, just sort of, I was like, I'm not gaining anything by giving them a paragraph summary. Like, just tell them what it is, let them click it or not. The other thing is the way I think about the curation of it, both in the Sunday issue, which has a lot of links, and also in the weekdays, sort of one by one. I'll talk about Sundays first. So my goal is not to have everybody click all the links in my issue. I want everyone in my audience to find one thing in that Sunday newsletter that they love. I don't care, because my theory on all of this is that if someone opens your newsletter and they find one thing that's super valuable or they love, they're going to open the next one, right? That the only way you lose is that they open it and they're like, there's nothing in here that I care about. And they open the next one and there's nothing in here I really care about. And now maybe they don't open the next one and you're on your way to losing them. But so when I'm curating the mix of content, and there's usually 5 main links in my Sunday newsletter, I'm curating with that in mind. So I know I might find an incredible article about how to grow on YouTube, but chances are 70% of my audience isn't on YouTube, and that's meaningless to them. But that 30% is going to love it. So then the next link, I'm not going to have 5 links about YouTube, right? The next link might be something about how to grow on Twitter. Again, there's a percentage of my audience that's going to love that, and the other percentage isn't going to care, right? But that's fine as long as I have at least one thing for them. So of those 5 links, there will usually be 1 or 2 that are relatively universal, right? So something that might be productivity based, where you might use YouTube, you might use Twitter, you might use whatever. Chances are you want to improve your productivity, right? So there tends to be this mix of the hyper specific, like, I use Twitter, this is a must read for me, and the sort of broad, so that, again, my goal is that mix will cover sort of the breadth of my audience. And then on the weekday issues, where there's only 1 item in each thing, obviously, if I share something for YouTube, I know that 70% of my audience might not care about that as a daily. So that's a potential quote unquote miss. But that means the next day is going to be sort of something broader. So my goal is that to sort of keep it on the weekday issues the same way I do the Sunday, where it's like you never go more than 2 or 3 days without something that's going to be relevant and valuable to you. So that's sort of how I think about it.
One thing before I forget, I love that your weekly newsletter is so short. That to me, this is something that every new newsletter writer needs to get over, is the thought that people care what they have to say so much that they're going to like slog through a long email.
Yep.
And like you're saying, people are going to come back if the like value is there, like, hey, I opened this and I found something. And so on Sunday, you're like, hey, I'm gonna give you 5 different things and you'll find something. Monday through Thursday or Friday, whenever you send it, it's like, you're going to open this and you might not find it valuable, but I also didn't take any of your time. Like, you're already done. So like I'll open Tuesday because like I didn't waste anything, you know? So we're also, the pour over is super concise. And yeah, that just takes, because the worst case scenario is someone gives you a chance. They invest so much time trying to read what you have to say. And at the end, they're like, well, could have done without that. Like, that's someone you've lost and you're never going to get back. And the easiest way to hedge against that is like, just don't take so much from them. Keep it short.
By the way, I love that you said that, because it sets me up. Like, one of my favorite topics is like, I think almost everybody's newsletters are way too long. And even if you're going to write a long thing, I actually think the newsletter or the email should be quick summary link to it on your website or your blog post or whatever. I'm not a fan of like really long newsletter text for a variety of reasons, but a couple sort of stats, you know, that was really interesting. Once I launched the sort of weekday, like 1 sentence, 1 paragraph newsletter, I will get more clicks on the 1 link in a weekday issue than I get in all the links combined on Sunday to the same audience. So from an engagement perspective, the less you share, your engagement's going to go way up, right? Like, there's no logical reason why that should be necessarily. Like, I have 20 links in a Sunday issue, and those 20 links to the same audience, the same type of content, just as valuable, written by the same person. There's no reason why 1 link on a Tuesday should drive more than 20 links on a Sunday. The other thing that I would say is, and I found this in my own behavior, there are newsletters that I really like, are super valuable. I know they're good, and I hesitate to open them because I know when I do, there's going to be a million things I want to see. And I'm like, I don't have time to do that right now. I'm going to do that later, right? Whereas if people know when they get a daily email from me, to your point, even if they don't like it, it's going to be a commitment of like 3 seconds of their time. So, and I noticed with myself that the newsletters that I always opened were the ones that I knew this is going to be a quick read. And sometimes, you know, and I've said this maybe before, and I don't mean to pick on him because I think his stuff is great, but like Dan Oshinsky's Not a Newsletter thing is amazing. There's so much stuff in there. And yet I often don't open it because I'm like, this is going to be, I don't have an hour to go through this now. And I find myself doing like, oh, I'll look at it later. And sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't. Right. So, you know, and I'm going to drop a link to, I've talked about this sort of shortening of newsletters a lot. And I think a lot of people, I did a thread, and I'll just drop it in the chat, about how to trim the fat in your newsletter. Because I think there's a lot of little things that people are doing. You know, those intro paragraphs that are like, welcome to the 32 new subscribers I got this week. Your audience does not care. You don't need that. The intros that are like, today I'm going to tell you about X, Y, and Z. Well, just tell me about X, Y, and Z. Like, I can scroll down and see your headlines. Like, there's just, I find a lot of stuff that's just lengthening newsletters, and it's working against people, whether they realize it or not.
It's interesting. It's almost like other newsletters are producing podcast episodes or sort of YouTube episodes, and you're doing TikToks almost.
Yeah, it's fine. I never really thought about it that way, but yeah, you know, and sometimes at the weekday issue, I like literally, I'm trying to think of an example, but like I have had a weekday issue that was, I think, 3 words. Like, I think that the subject line was, you know, I don't remember exactly, but, you know, something like the subject, I'll give you a hypothetical example. The subject line might be, I decided to change how I do my newsletter. Curiosity provoking, whatever. They open it up and the whole newsletter is after I watched this, and it's a link. That's the other thing. Again, when you're doing a sort of one topic short email, you can use the subject line almost like setup and just drive them. And again, this only works because I've built up trust with my audience and all that.
Well,
kind of stuff.
And that's a risk because you've built up trust, but if that's someone's first email, that link better deliver, because it's like, I mean, it's clickbait, and but clickbait works. You want someone to click, but you also need to deliver on the trust. And I think one thing that you said that I think makes a lot of sense for what you're doing, and obviously it's working, but I, as a category, kind of dislike, like, we're a newsletter first organization, like we also have the podcast, we also have Instagram, but we're newsletter first. And so our goal is to say, you don't have to click out of like, you get the information, and there's also, like, we have 30 links, there's all sorts of opportunities to go deeper, but you don't feel dissatisfied at the end of the newsletter, because so many newsletters are just marketing or advertising tools for another product, and it's like, hey, I'm just trying to get this sale on my store, or I'm just trying to get something else. And so to say, like, hey, if you're newsletter first, then you should read the newsletter and be like, I've experienced the pour over today. Like, I didn't need to click out and read more. That said, we also sell ads, and a lot of those are not just pure brand advertising. It's like, and we have, it's called whipped cream on top, and it's like a link to a TikTok. It's complete utter fluff, and we do the same thing. It's like something that is incomplete until you click on it, to drive clicks, and say, if you want this product, click here and do things. But it's a mix. And like, if you're creating a newsletter, we work hard to prioritize that the newsletter delivers all the value that you've signed up for, and isn't just a tool to try to grow your YouTube channel.
Yeah. And I think I love that you brought up clickbait too, because I think clickbait actually gets a really bad rap. And this is why, right? Clickbait is only bad if what you send them to doesn't live up to the promise you make. That's clickbait, right? There's a bait and switch. If it lives up to the promise you make, it's just great copy or a great headline, right?
Absolutely.
And
like,
so,
Mr. Beast, his entire empire, Mr. Beast's empire is, hey, I'm gonna make a clickbait-y title. Like, I gave away $1 million to someone who stood in a circle for 24 hours. And it's like, but then when he actually did, you expect to be deceived. But then when it actually delivers, you're like, I freaking love this guy, and I'm gonna subscribe and do all this stuff. And it's like, so exactly what you're saying. Like, if it's not a bait and switch, and you build trust, and then you've built a fan for life.
Right. And you'll see there's so much hesitation, especially from people whose intentions are awesome, right? Like, they truly care about their, like, I don't want to do that format of headline. That seems sleazy. I'm like, but is the thing you're going to deliver live up to it? Like, that's not sleazy, right? So I think that is, especially in my weekday edition, I do less so the Sunday. The Sunday edition is much more sort of straightforward. Headline's going to tell you exactly what it is. Like, it's not really clickbaity at all. The weekday ones, and this is probably part of why they get more clicks, are a little clickbaity, but they're never deceiving, right? And that's why I never get any pushback about, if I'm going to say, this, I saw this and it's going to change how I do my newsletter. I'm not going to say that unless I genuinely mean I saw this and it's going to change how I do my newsletter, right? So I think that, that's why I say sort of clickbait gets a bad rap, because I think if your intentions are to actually live up to what you promised, there's nothing wrong with that, and it'll actually help you.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in here because I want us to get to some questions. We had a couple that have already come in. If you're reading this, if you have any questions you'd like to ask Josh and Jason, put them in now while we move on to one final question from me, and then we'll jump into those. So I mean, we were just touching on that topic anyway before we got into the clickbait stuff, which was around almost a conflict of interests between wanting to write a newsletter that is short and to the point and only provides value for the reader and the most value that you can for the reader, but also needing to put ads into the newsletter and also needing to drive clicks in some places. Obviously, we've seen a lot of examples, including both of your own, of newsletters where you can provide a really valuable newsletter that people genuinely love to open and love to read, but that also has advertising in it. How aware are both of you of that conflict? Is there even a tension or a conflict between the two? And how do you, like, what do you sort of, how do you manage that, I guess, in a broad question?
Be picky with who you advertise. I mean, I think that's how you reduce the conflict. There's just such a big difference between you go into a site and there's like a banner ad and you following someone you know and them recommending actually use. And so it's I guess the few things that we do are, one, we kind of demand variety in our newsletter. For example, we're booked like 3 weeks out generally for ads, like total, and we're booked like 6 months out for nonprofits wanting to raise money, because we can raise money, but it's like we're not doing that every time. So like we limit those slots, and so that's like limiting the slots and saying, hey, there's going to be good variety, so that, because like Josh was saying, not everything resonates with everyone. And so you need to have good variety to keep and maintain that trust. And people get ads, like, and when people complain about the ads, like our response is just like, oh yeah, like, sorry you didn't like it. We're so grateful for them for allowing them to like allow us to offer all our content for free. And it's like, I'm gonna, just, if you don't like it, unsubscribe. Like ads are how it works, and we vet our ads. We make sure it's something. We have a native ad, and then we have what are called TPO picks and their recommendations. And like, it's pretty simple. We make sure we actually test those things before we recommend them. Like you can't only pay to get on. If the book sucks, we're not going to promote it. If like the weird coffee tastes bad, we're not going to promote it. And yeah, so that's how you deal with the tension. And then, yeah, like I said, do your best, and then live in the tension. You know, it's a little hard. And if people are upset with the tension, it's like, well, I'm offering a free product, so it is what it is.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be for everybody. For me, my ads are, again, a little different than what most people do. They're more similar to classified ads. So I have 5 ad slots a week. They're all sort of like one line. I think the limit is like 150 characters, text only, no image, no big banner ad, none of that. Most of them are being bought by my audience, which is a nice sort of alignment. I'm not doing outreach and going to brands. Some brands buy, but I'm not sort of doing a lot of like active sales outreach. When people buy an ad, they actually get 2 ads. So they become one of 5 sponsors in the Sunday issue. And then they're the sole sponsor of one of the weekday issues the following week. The other thing that's different than a lot of people, I write the copy for the weekday issue. The weekday issue, again, because of the engagement and the clicks, drives the vast majority of the action. And for me and my advertisers, I'm very focused on, yes, I tell them how many, subscribers I have and open rate and all that kind of stuff, but I'm not selling impressions. I think as an advertiser, your best bet of getting a sale, a conversion, whatever you want, is get them to your website, get them into your world. Right. So what I'm focused on and what I'm talking to people about is like, here's how many clicks I'm going to drive your way. Right. Not, I'm going to slap your logo in the sponsor section. No offense. I'm going to slap your logo in the sponsor section at the top of my newsletter. And all my readers are going to scroll right past it because they've been trained to do so, because they know that's where the ad is. Right. So that has worked really well for me and for my advertisers. And so that approach also just real quick, when I first launched ads, I was very hesitant. One of the reasons why I didn't do it for like 4 years is because I thought it would annoy readers. Again, I'm always focused on sort of audience first. And I did a survey and I asked my readers at the time, if I did these little sort of classified ad style ads, would you want to see them? Would you potentially want to buy them, or no, keep the ads out of this newsletter? 90% of the people of my readers who replied to the survey said they'd either want to see them and potentially might want to buy them. I was shocked. I was like, oh my God. Like, I assume people will be like, no, I hate ads. Quite the opposite. 90% were like, yeah, let's do it. And I think that's part, again, to your point, they trust my judgment. They trust that the ads are not going to be obnoxious and intrusive, and they're going to actually provide value. It's why the clicks are high. They're very relevant to people. And in my case, a lot of my audience wants to reach my audience. So it created an opportunity for them it's become another way for me to help people, in addition to sort of monetization for me. So it's worked really well. Again, that's in part because I have a newsletter that's aligned that way. For example, I'm guessing that most of Jason's readers are not going to be advertisers, because it's just different dynamic. So again, it's something that works for me. It won't work for everybody.
Awesome. Well, unusually, oh no, there we go. I was going to say that the questions, normally we get a huge amount of questions, but it looks like we've managed to cover almost everything today, which is amazing. But there is now one question which came up, which we didn't address during the conversation. Most of them we actually got to, which is awesome. And Dan is asking, I think, most sort of coming back to what Josh was talking about a little bit earlier around the archive, whether we have any best practices or suggestions, tips, tricks for taking the content of the newsletter and effectively putting it onto the website or making it available online, basically.
I can talk about how I do it on my website. This is one of the things that I have somebody help me with logistically, but it's really just a copy and paste, right? So she copies and pastes, the full newsletter goes on the site. And then because my newsletter is sort of modular, right? So it's like there's 5 items. It's very easy to just copy and paste and make that headline the headline of an individual post. By the way, I'm not a big SEO guy. This is probably terrible for SEO. So if you're an SEO person, this probably isn't the way to do it. But from a user experience, sort of easy searchable archive, that works really well for me. And I would say the other thing about this is, again, because this stuff is evergreen, I'm able to repurpose this stuff into social posts, I'm able to use it in all sorts of ways over time. The other sort of general tip I would give is, I'm a big fan of sort of modular newsletters. So whatever it is you're going to do, however you're going to create it, if you have a modular format, number one, I think it makes it easier to write consistently because you're just plugging stuff in. I know exactly what I need for each week's issue. Sometimes people, I find, are sort of reinventing the wheel every time. And they're like, what's this week's newsletter going to be like? And I think it's much easier. And I also think for readers, they get used to my newsletter, there's an intro section. There's what I call the starting 5, which are the 5 main links. There's the ads and what I call sources and sponsors. So it's also like, oh, I found this from this person, and this person's an advertiser and whatever. And then my final words of the week, which is just like a random sort of paragraph that I can use to do whatever I want to do. So when I go to write my newsletter, I know I'm just sort of filling in those blanks. But that modular approach also makes it much easier to repurpose stuff. Because if I was sort of writing an essay format talking about whatever, I would not be able to have someone who works for me. Like, they wouldn't be able to just copy and paste and add it to the website, because it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work that way. So those things, that's how I approach it. And I think that, if you design purposefully within mind that you're going to repurpose and repackage stuff, it makes it easier to repurpose and repackage stuff.
Yeah. We don't put it on our website.
People don't want to go back and read the news from 3 months ago
people, well, and obviously there are lots of news sites, and so like news on the web is certainly a thing, but we don't want you to read a single article. We want you to subscribe. So sorry you missed yesterday's news. Give me your email.
There will be news tomorrow, I guess. Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome stuff. Well, both of you, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. What I'd love to get from you as we round up is, firstly, where can people find you? And if they have any questions, ask those and go and subscribe to the newsletter. Feel free to drop the links into the chat here as well. And then secondly, if we can leave with sort of one piece of advice that you'd give, I guess, your former self or a potential newsletter operator starting out today about how they can create better content, better understand their audience, write a better newsletter that their readers will get more value from or enjoy more.
Yeah, I'll drop the link to the pour over.
You can drop the links while you think of the
interested.
answer. That's fine. We can
I would say probably the biggest advice, just to reiterate something we said earlier, is to just spend most of your time rewriting and trying to cut down the length. Like make it as concise as possible. Josh is clearly way better at this than me. I've never sent a 3-word email, but that forces you to become a better writer, and it is what your readers want. They want distilled value. They don't want to have to find the nugget of gold in a long paragraph. Like, just give them the nugget.
Yeah, it's funny. I agree with that completely. I would say a couple things. So one is, I think it's really important to get clear on the specific value you want to provide to a specific audience. I think a lot of people are way too vague about that. And I also think a lot of people think in terms of, I want to do a newsletter on this topic, as opposed to value and audience, right? So they go, there's a difference between saying, I want to do a newsletter on self-improvement, and saying, I want to do a newsletter to help people who suffer from imposter syndrome move forward and take put their things out into the world. I'm making this up, right? But the more specific you get, not only is it easier to attract your audience and identify your audience and convert your audience, it's also much easier to write the newsletter, right? If you go out and you go, I'm doing a newsletter on self-improvement, like, okay, like that could be anything, right? There's a million things to do. If you go, I want to help people get over imposter syndrome, that narrowing makes it much easier for you to actually write it and create something that's good, and it's going to help you stand out. The other thing I would say is, and this goes right in line with sort of shortening things, and this is just this is my favorite, like, sort of general writing bit of advice. You can use it for blog posts, you can use it for speeches, you can use it for anything. When you think you are done with your newsletter and you're about to hit publish, go do a word count and then force yourself to delete 10 to 20% of the words. And what happens is, not only it will always get stronger, but unlike what most editing is you've written a thing, you feel good about it, you're like, now I'm going to go edit it, and you're reading it over. And with each thing, you're sort of going, do I like this or not? Of course you like it. Like, you wrote it, right? Like, when you flip it and you go, I have to get rid of 20% of these words, your mindset is now not looking for, is this valuable or not? Is this helpful or not? You're now looking for, what is the least helpful or the least valuable of the stuff that I have. And that's a totally different mindset. And I guarantee you, if you do it with anything you write, no matter how short, no matter how long, that, that will drastically improve everything you do. And I'm shocked. Like, I write pretty concisely. And I don't do it a lot with newsletters, but I do it with blog posts all the time. And I think I'm done. And then I go, okay, how am I going to find 20% to cut out of this? And then you find it and you go, wow, you know what? This is a lot better, right? You wind up condensing stuff. So that's my favorite tip for writers in general.
Josh, I'm so excited for your newsletter. I said something interesting and you made it valuable and actionable. So I think I'm going to be your new biggest fan. This has been fun talking with you.
Yeah, we said to Louis before this that really the whole purpose, you guys think this Fireside Chat's for you. It's really just so Jason and I could meet each other.
It's just the service we provide at Sparkloop. All Sparkloop clients get that handheld matchmaking service. It's a
Right.
Hallmark movie in the
Exactly.
making.
This is like, instead of Fireside Chat, it's like Fireside Upscribe or
Exactly.
whatever. Fireside Partner Program.
Awesome stuff. Perfect. Well, thank you both again so much for doing this. Thank you, everybody, for joining. No, we are not doing a dating app for newsletter publishers. I'm not quite that desperate yet, but we'll see how it goes. Might have to make some tweaks. Thank you, everyone. We will have a new event next week and one each week. So look out for those. They'll be in your inbox with a few more words than Josh writes, but hopefully I can cut out 20% of those and get them down to something approaching Josh's approval. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.